Whew, man, this start time. All right, let's just talk about it. Oregon at Ohio State. Buckeyes favored by 14 this morning, 14 and a half now. It is a noon Eastern time kickoff on Fox. And for those of you unfamiliar, Oregon does not reside on the Eastern time zone. They reside in the Pacific time zone. It's a 9 a.m. kickoff for them. Quack, quack. Welcome to Big Fox Saturday. I love the early window, but I grew up in Eastern time zone, and I'm in Central now, so it's not a big deal for me, but it is. I mean, if you're living out there in Sacramento or you're living in Pocatello, Idaho, hello, Pocatello, first mentioned on the show, this is ridiculous. You're eating bacon and eggs and you're watching actual games being played. You're not talking about it at a tailgate and it's still several hours away. So, man, as far as the game goes, because we can't change the kickoff time, these are two of the premier brands in the sport. This is one of the most beautiful out-of-conference matchups of the year, but they're two of the most premier recruiting brands in the game, too. And if you've been following recruiting, Ohio State's always there. Mario Cristobal and his staff have been killing it. They're just out working folks. And they're going into several states. It's not just a 1 or 2 state effort. They don't just hawk all of Southern California. They go all over the place. This would so help them. It's kind of that situation that Miami found themselves in, only this game should be more competitive. But it's one of those, if you win, that's wonderful and all is well, all is great with the world there. But even if you're competitive, that's enough to sell in recruiting. So you've got an opportunity 2 ways here. Ohio State, it's the opportunity that they really didn't fully stamp last week, and that is the opportunity to announce themselves as a for sure bona fide national championship contender. Because if you watched them last week and I told you they're playing Alabama Saturday, you'd pick Bama by 2 or 3 touchdowns. Now that wouldn't be the way probably that it plays out in a point spread, but that's what you'd think. So there's still a long way to go and a long way to grow for Ohio State. But for Oregon, this is a chance to measure yourself against one of the best rosters in America. Oregon is not a typical Pac-12 team. Independent of what last week's result led you to think you know, they are not a typical Pac-12 team. So anyone that thinks this is some blowout from jump and, you know, a Pac-12 team is not going to compete with Ohio State, no, most of them wouldn't. Oregon would fit in very well in several other major conferences, and they'd be a contender. That's not a prediction on the game. I'm about to make that, but just be heads up. So they both played fairly good teams in week 1. Minnesota was a good team. Fresno State's a lot better team, I think, than most people realize. And there was mild freak out about both offenses. You know, C.J. Stroud overthrowing receivers early. I'm getting text messages at halftime of week 1. Is it time to pull the plug? Well, Ryan Day did not text me that, and he did not pull the plug. And they're going to be okay. Believe it or not, C.J. Stroud going to be okay. And he doesn't have to do nearly as much as most other quarterbacks because he's got fighter jets all around him. He just make good decisions. He'll be okay. But with Oregon, you know, there were questions about them too. I think it had a lot more to do with the offensive game plan going in. But then an Oregon Duck fan would counter and say, nah, we have failed to live up to the expectation level I've had for our offense for several situations now, several games under Mario Cristobal. I just want us to use our weapons more. Okay, well, in any event, for the folks who are just telling me, oh, we weren't good enough in week 1, that doesn't really tell me much. You got to zoom in, and you got to give me specifics about week 1. So dive into where this game, this Oregon-Ohio State game is going to be won or lost. First thing I'm looking at, Oregon's defensive back play, when you talked about this game in the summer, was looked at as a glaring vulnerability. I don't view it that way. In fact, I think Oregon's defensive backs, corners and safeties specifically, they're getting a couple of them back this week, I think they'll be able to, relatively speaking, match up with Ohio State's receiver core almost as well as any team they're going to play in the regular season or the Big Ten championship game if they make it there. I'm not telling you they're going to go toe-to-toe and not give up anything. I'm telling you athletically and speed-wise, those corners and safeties are not bad for Oregon. Where Oregon's going to have to shore things up considerably is pass coverage at linebacker. They got some supremely talented linebackers, but they're young and still inexperienced in that facet of the game. It's just not something you do a whole lot at the high school level. That is where that game could be won or lost. It's where it could really loosen things up, shall I say, for Ohio State's passing game. You can live, if you're Oregon, you can live with those big-time receivers for Ohio State just making plays, just being better than your guys. You can live with that. What you can't live with is making C.J. Stroud do nothing more than throw the ball 5 or 6 yards over the middle and then watch his receivers run free another 20, 25 yards after catch because you had missed tackles, you had missed assignments or missed reads at linebacker. That's one thing. The second thing, which is imperative and we can't know it at this point, is the status of Kayvon Thibodeau, who may be one of the best players in the country. There's no maybe to it. He's one of the best players in the country. He has the ability, he's a supremely talented pass rusher, to change a game. One of very few players in America you would say that about. And he sprained his ankle last week. He's questionable right now. Oregon needs him to win the game. Feel pretty confident in saying that. Number two, and the way we do these games, if there's a 2-touchdown spread, is we spend a lot of time talking about the underdog because the spread is what it is for a reason. I don't need to tell you all the advantages Ohio State has. We want to paint a picture of how the upset could possibly happen. Oregon needs to do more stuff than Ohio State. There's a lot that Oregon needs to do. This is not a pick-em game. It's a 2-touchdown spread for a reason. So Oregon's got to force the issue a little bit more. They probably have to win the turnover battle. They probably have to take more risk offensively, really. A lot of these things have to happen in conjunction. But their offensive game plan last week will not get it done. Now, I think they understand that. I don't think they're using a mirror image game plan here, but Oregon's got to give themselves a chance. Last week's game plan, and to be frank with you, the kind of game plan they've gone into battle with a few too many times as of late will not get it done. Now, this makes you uneasy. If you're a guy like Mario Cristobal, I know it makes you uneasy. But if you've ever taught a kid to ride a bike, like, you know, you push them and you push them and you push them, the training wheels are off and you're kind of guiding them. Eventually, though, there comes a time where you got to take your hands off their lower back and you just got to let them glide. They may fall, they may not, but there's only one way to learn. You eventually got to let it go. And with Oregon, when you got the kind of skill they have, and I know good and well they have it, it hasn't been fully utilized. This is the week you got to do it. And it's high risk, high reward. Absolutely it is. But like I said, the default setting is not you being on equal footing with this team. You're going into what will be a packed house, extremely hostile environment, the most incredible atmosphere your kids will have played in. You've got enough athletes. You've recruited well enough. And so you got to take some risk. Ohio State doesn't. They don't have to take as much risk. They're in their backyard. They got the better roster. You got to take some risk. You got to let go of the bike. And you got to let your horses run. It's what you got to do. You got to let your athletes play. And you got to use a little bit more of that 53 yards they give you as opposed to just the 100 vertical. You got to get those guys in space more. And you got to trust Anthony Brown. You may not feel supremely confident about it, but you got to trust him because this is going to be the fastest team that Ohio State faces in the regular season. But it doesn't matter if you don't use all that space. And that's a welcome. That is a welcome idea. By the way, if Kerry Combs in that defense is you playing in a phone booth. They welcome that. He'd love you to do that. In fact, he'd get out of the way and let you line up in any formation you want to, in bunch sets and whatnot. He'd love for you to do that. Run into that brick wall all day. What he doesn't want is he doesn't want to see you all of a sudden with those wider splits. He doesn't want to see those receivers taking up that entire field. And he doesn't want you distributing the ball to a number of different playmakers, including those backs out of the backfield. That's not what Ohio State wants to see. They're interested in watching you play the way you have played, to be perfectly clear. So thirdly, as it relates to last week, here's where we started, here's where we'll land before we make the prediction. As it relates to last week, I am pretty confident in saying that Ohio State went into the Minnesota game and Oregon went into the Fresno State game, and the offensive game plans are what a lot of people use as a term, and it's very overused, but I think it's accurate here. They had sort of vanilla game plans. They had do enough and survive in advance type of game plans. And both of them almost got bit by it. A lot of you don't think this happens. This does happen. Whatever these passing games are capable of, this is where you'll find out about it. Because no one in Columbus, Ohio had the Minnesota game circled to unveil every facet of their passing attack. They had the Oregon game circled. No one in Eugene, Oregon looked to the schedule and said, boy, we're unloading on Fresno. No, they said, here's what we're going to use against Fresno. Here's everything we're going to use in week 2, and we're going to let the chips fall where they may in Columbus. That is why I expect a better offensive showing from both teams, or if it's not a better offensive showing, they're going to end up turning the ball over, which I think will ultimately decide a couple of scores in this game, by the way, because there will be more risk taken through the air by each team. Even Ohio State, I fully believe that. So, Jesse, let's take a look at what Vegas thinks, and let's take a look at what the late kick model thinks. The model performed pretty well across the board last week, by the way. So the noon kickoff here, the Caesars line currently is Ohio State minus 14.5. Our number is even bigger. Our number is at Ohio State minus 16.5. I expect a different level of play from Oregon offensively this week, detailing and reasoning being a lot of the things I just said. Because of that, I will pick Ohio State to win the game. I actually think the number is going to come inside 2 touchdowns. I think they'll be more competitive. I think, quite frankly, Ohio State, not Ohio State, they won't be surprised. I think some of America will be a little surprised at how effective Oregon is Saturday. I think a lot of people expect them to get blown out. Or at the very least, they expect it to be competitive early and then Ohio State stretches it late. I think Oregon's going to play 4 quarters with them. I don't think they're going to win, but I think they'll be very competitive. And if those turnovers do start going their way, they absolutely have a puncher's chance of winning. Give me Buckeyes to win. Give me Ducks to cover.